Copenhagen, 1880. A 39-year-old building contractor named Hans Pedersen decided he wanted to become a florist. But in Denmark, it took 7 years apprenticeship. Instead, Hans decided to bring his family to North America and came to St. John, New Brunswick. His children and their children and their children have spread across North America. But his oldest surviving descendant is still in St. John. Her name is Jesse Pedersen Nagle. So Grandfather Pedersen, or great-grandfather Pedersen for me, met Marie in Sweden.
I believe that's right.
And she was British.
She was British, born in England.
And he had been a contractor in Denmark.
Yeah.
But made the decision to come to Canada.
Yeah. And she was the prettiest and most vivacious little lady that I think I have ever known. And she would laugh until the tears ran down her face. And you know, and Grandfather Pedersen was so different. He was so dignified, and I don't know. They say opposites attract. Well, it was certainly that case with them.
What's your memory of him?
Of him?
Yeah.
I remember him being very kind to me. See, I was 6 years old when he died, but I can remember him being very kind to me and taking my hand always when we went walking. And I always remembered that his suits always felt silky, really beautiful clothes, and a lovely watch chain he wore with a watch. And I know he had a full-length raccoon coat that my father used to wear in the wintertime when we went out sleighing or fishing or anything on the ice. And, well, my grandmother Pedersen was one of the most charming, sweet little ladies that I can ever remember, and I loved her dearly. And I used to go up to Lakeside, and at that time that I remember particularly, Grandfather had died, and she had this big canopied bed, and there were steps, little steps that you stepped up to get into this bed. It was high, and I can remember that, and I used to think, isn't that lovely? It's just like a cave. And she would have an apple, generally one of their good apples, under the pillow, and a little package with sugar cookies flavored with caraway. Did you ever eat them? She always made them that way. And why she would let me eat these things in bed with her, I don't know, but she did. And I just loved her, and the two of us would snuggle down in bed. And she was one of the happiest people, you know. She was so bright and always cheerful and hurrying around. And she was always known as Marie. She never used Hester. Hester wouldn't have suited her anyway. It's too prim. But I often wondered whether they were Puritan people with that name, that Puritan name. But she caught pneumonia and died. In those days they didn't have good drugs like they do now, and she died. grandfather Pedersen was born in Denmark, and when he was just a young man, he sold his contracting business in Copenhagen and his home, and decided that he was going out to Canada to become a florist. And I've always thought that he must have had a lot of courage and determination to do it, because to gather up his young family, because there were several boys born then, and my father was 7 years old when they came, and it must have been a big undertaking.
I've got a sheet of paper here, and I don't know whether you wrote this one or not, but take a look at the list of children there that came with Hans and Marie.
Peter William lost at sea. Walter married Susan McGuire. Do you know Walter's right name, the Danish name, was Waldemar, and he never used it. He always used Walter. And I think Waldemar is a much nicer name than Walter. Viggo married Isabel Turner. Christian, Hugo, Pauline, Louis Jackson, Louise. Did you know what happened to Carl Wissinger? Dad always believed that he committed suicide because he'd been having some trouble with his business. His finances weren't good. And he went out one night, kissed them goodbye, and went out one night. No one's ever seen any sign of him since. He just disappeared.
And that was here in St. John?
Yeah, here in St. John. They lived on Spring Street. Yeah. And then after 7 years, he was declared legally dead. But she had gotten a divorce anyway, and that's how she came to marry Edward Alexander down in the States. Yeah. Pauline, Louise, Astrid. Oh, yes, I must have given this to them. Torquil moved to England when he was a young man. I know Walter was born in Copenhagen because I remember Dad telling me that his mother always said that she was out dancing just before Uncle Walter was born. And I'm very sure, too, that Uncle Viggo was born in Denmark. Anyway, they came out here to St. John, and originally he had looked at the property up where, is it Ravenscliffe Court is? You know where those big stone buildings are now? There was a big stone house, but there wasn't enough land there to do, and he wanted plenty of land. So he found this place, Sandy Point. I don't know why grandfather decided to leave one business that was so different from a flower business. But that was what he wanted to do, and at that time you had to be you had to be like a trainee for 7 years before you could be a florist in Denmark. I don't know whether it's still like that or not, but that's the way it was then, and he was determined he was going to grow flowers, so that's what he did.
Do you have any idea why they picked St. John?
No, I've often wondered about that myself. I would have thought it was an unusual place for them to pick because the land was so different from Denmark. You know, everything is so now carefully cultivated and cared for, even their woods and forests. Dad told me about them. You couldn't cut a tree down unless you planted another one in its place. That was years ago. But it's strange to look back and wonder, you know, what went through people's minds.
Just tell me again, when they arrived in St. John, what your grandfather did to set up the florist business.
What he did? He just went right ahead and built greenhouses and started to sell flowers. And I know that they had a flower store in the very early 1900s. But before that, I don't know whether grandfather had a store. Nobody ever told me that. And it could be that, I suppose that market was in existence at that time, wouldn't you think?
Yeah.
And they probably might have taken the flowers in there and sold them.
Yeah.
But the difference in price of flowers then and flowers now, even flowers when I was growing up and in business, it's just shocking. Like everything else, it just has climbed and climbed and climbed.
So initially, 2 of his sons went into the business with him.
Yeah.
Walter and your father, Chris.
Yeah. They were the only 2 who did.
So what's your earliest memory of the flower business?
I think I always remembered that they were there. And I used to have jobs to do when I went to school. Not before that, but after I would come home from school, I was given jobs to do. You know, carnations have to be all disbudded, every single one of them, and leave this one big bloom so that it's a good size. That was one of my jobs. And another job was to pick bunches of sweet alyssum. It was very much like the sweet alyssum they grow outdoors, little white flower. They grew it along the edges of the beds, and the bunches would be about that big, and I picked those. And I suppose there may be 20 bunches or so each day to go into the store. And they used that as a filler in the funeral work and a lot of the things. They didn't make arrangements like they do today. And I used to pick bunches of parsley too, which went to the market. And the bunches of parsley were picked from the edges of the beds too. They were all just extra things that were grown in each bed, you see, to bring in extra cash. And I don't remember my mother ever going to the greenhouses very much. She would go down and look at maybe some special crop or something, but I was always down there. And I can remember playing flower shop when I was a little girl and making miniature sprays, and I had a cart, and that was my delivery. And I would play in that for hours. But I always knew I wanted to go in the flower business. I had no interest in anything else. I think it was about 1912 when he retired from the business and passed it over to, maybe it was before that, could have been before that, to Dad and Uncle Walter, you see. And he had sold all the 100 acres that was where the big park property is now to this firm in Montreal, and they were going to make a big housing development up there that they were going to call Walter C. Heights. And Grandfather had $45,000 in cash from them, which was a very nice sum, plus what he had made from the flower business here. And he went up to, retired, and went up to Lakeside, and he lived there until he died. He bought this big house, huge house, and I think they had a very nice life. They had help in the house and were very comfortable. But after Grandfather died, she and Aunt Astrid got the bright idea, and they took some of the money that Grandfather had left and bought all the supplies that they would need, and they hired help, extra help, and they started this business of having these guests come in the summertime. And they were moneyed people, and generally middle-aged and older ladies. I remember there was a pair of ladies, two sisters, the Mrs. Hall, and I think they lived on King Street East, and they always came every summer. And there was a Mrs. Stewart who came with her granddaughters, the two Nace children, and a Mr. and Mrs. Yetman. And he had the first car that I remember very well. And they would come and they would stay maybe the whole summer. And Grandmother and Aunt Astrid were fabulous cooks. Oh my goodness, the meals that they served. No wonder those people came and stayed. And they had a real good business. And then, of course, in the fall, all these people went back to St. John's town, and they had the rest of the year to themselves, and they were fine. And I remember there was a houseman and a cook and maids, and they really had a wonderful life. But then after Grandmother died, Aunt Astrid went away to the States to live and work. And Grandfather had left her money that was to be used for her in her lifetime.
So initially, two of his sons went into the business with him.
Yeah.
Walter and your father, Chris.
Yeah. They were the only two who did. And I know that this house here was finished in 1907, 1906, 1907. And Dad and Uncle Walter built it together.
When they built it, they were both going to live in it.
Yeah, they did for a short time. Uncle Walter was married by then to this Susan McGuire, and they lived on the other side of the house. And Dad and my mother lived here. And then, as far as I know for sure, they separated about 1912, right after I was born, I guess. That would have been 1913, no, wouldn't it? Because I was born in November. It would be 1913. And, you know, I don't think that grandfather was very happy about that split between the two boys, because I don't ever remember them, you know, mentioning Uncle Walter, or never said anything about him at all. And I know it bothered Dad terribly too, but he just felt he had to do it. And then the lawyers didn't put into the agreement when they separated that Uncle Walter was not to start up another flower business. So he went out to Glen Falls and built greenhouses out there and built himself a house and opened a store on the other side of Charlotte Street from my father. So my father had the idea that he would use this slogan on the wrong side of Charlotte Street, and he used it, I guess, all the years that he was in business. But it caused a lot of trouble in the...
Do you have any idea what the split was over?
Dad told me that Uncle Walter was not keeping the books the way he thought they should be kept, and that's what they quarreled over. I have no idea what he was doing, but you know, I've always had the idea that maybe Uncle Walter was kind of a rebel, and then when he went into the the liquor business, when he was in the flower business too. See, the flower business was a great cover. And, you know, Dad felt awful bad about that too. And I know it's an absolute fact that he did, because I can remember my father being upset in the middle of the night when he would get a call maybe 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and they would tell him that such and such a ship was coming in with this load of contraband liquor, and I suppose they would land it here, and then I don't know what they did with it, but he had this Ned Sowery as an accomplice, I suppose, and he protected him because I think it was called provincial police at that time. They didn't have RCMP at that time, and the two of them made out very well with their and I know that he made a great deal of money. In fact, once when I went out I used to go out in the later years and get a certain kind of calla lily that Uncle Walter grew. It was a smaller calla lily, and it was very graceful and pretty. And I used to buy them from him, and we got to be, you know, friends. And it was through that Dad and Uncle Walter finally made peace with each other before Dad died. And I was always glad they did. But one day he said, "Come here, I want to show you something." And he had this big desk, and he opened it up, and there were compartments, and they were just stuffed full of rolls of bills. Oh, that long, big rolls of bills. I couldn't tell you how many of them. I never took any money from them. I paid for the cow lilies, and that was it. But it was always a grief to Dad that they split up, because Dad told me that Uncle Walter and he had made their first $1,000 together, and they did everything together. But the thing I can't understand about what I've heard is that Vigo went to Boston, to the Boston Conservatory of Music. So did Uncle Hugo. And Dad went to a private school here in St. John. I remember him telling me where it was on Waterloo Street. An old professor had this school for boys. And Dad was always up to mischief. So they, I guess, decided that a better school was in Boston for him. So they shipped him off to Boston, and he went to this private school. And I remember Dad telling me he froze more in Boston than he ever had in his life. It was so cold. But the thing is, what had happened to Walter? Nobody ever mentioned where he went to school, what he did, not a thing. And I never was able to find out.
Maybe that's what led him to be on the other side of Charlotte Street.
It could be, you know. Maybe he felt that he had been slighted a little bit, you know. It's hard to say.
Well, the flower growing business, though, is a good business to be in.
It's a good business. Dad used to say it never did anybody any harm. He was death on the business of selling liquor.
Yeah.
He really felt awfully strongly about that. And he said that he always felt that anybody who went into the liquor business always had misfortune. And I know I've seen it happen too. But,
so which, where your dad had the store on Charlotte, was that near Union or was it near the square?
just about where, you know, remember Calps, just there. And he had the store there for many years, until about, must have been the 1930s, I would think.
So you did lots of work in that store.
Yeah, I sure did. Yeah, we had a real good business. We had all the main business, I guess. All of the people from St. Andrews we used to look after, and the government. I can remember doing table arrangements, maybe, I think there were maybe 100 or so at a time, and taking them up in a refrigerated truck to Fredericton for one of these big dinners when, I don't know, there were royalty or something came. And I think Dad used to be very generous with his flowers. Mother used to, I can remember Mother teasing him and saying that he would give all the profits away. But, you know, the ladies would come out from town and visit the greenhouses and be home with a nice big bouquet. No wonder they came. But flowers weren't so expensive then, you know. And they grew thousands of carnations and snapdragon and stock and plants by the hundreds. And But they really did, all of them, I would have said, were very comfortable and very fortunate in their lives, except for Walter. And I don't think he was ever happy. That lady, so-called, that he married was a bad choice. She was not a good woman at all. In fact, I always considered her a real devil. The things she did, you know, you wouldn't believe.
So but even at that stage, when your uncle was across the street, your dad and your uncle really didn't see each other. They were in business against each other at that point.
They really were, and you see, Walter's wife was in the store all the time, and I remember she used to stand in that window. It was, let me see, you know where the, what's the name of that a fish restaurant up on Charlotte Street now? Billy's. Yeah. You know where that is? Yeah. It was right there. And it was a nice store. A good store. Nothing the matter with it. The only thing matter with it was Mrs. Pedersen. What a woman. You know, she used to call and leave fictitious orders with us. And I don't know how they found out, but they did anyway. But she just pestered us, you know. So.
Did Walter ever get into any trouble with the law that you...
Never a bit. He had it made. He probably made some money with the flower business, but he wasn't particularly interested in selling flowers. It was a cover. Oh dear, maybe I should have kept that a top secret.
Well, I don't think it makes for a more interesting family.
Far more interesting family. Oh dear.
So your dad built this house with your Uncle Walter in 1907. It was a big house even then, I would think.
Big house even then. I don't know why on earth they built it so big. He could have had a great big family. But I often wonder how two men who were in the flower business ever managed to tackle a big job like this, because it must have been a huge job. You know, all the lumber that went into it and the plastering. Just an enormous job. But I remember there was one housekeeper we had was here for 17 years, and her father was a retired ship's carpenter, and he worked here and lived until he died. And he just went around every day checking all the things, houses that there were for the men, and the greenhouses, and anything that needed to be repaired was done. And I always thought, wouldn't it be great to have a ship's carpenter go around your house and check everything every day.
What do you remember of Vigo?
Vigo was one of the nicest men I ever met, and I was very fond of him. And he was a very quiet man, but not like Grandfather Pedersen, that he was you know, so reserved and dignified. John is very much like him, I think. When I look at John, I can see Uncle Beagle. And he was a good musician. I believe he taught violin here in St. John. I think he was still teaching when I suppose I might have been in my teens, maybe, because I remember going out to that nice house at Brookville. Do you remember? Yeah, yeah. And but he was very quiet, a very quiet gentleman, right to the backbone. And I believe he was a very clever accountant too. And I often wondered about him. Why maybe he didn't do more with his music. I suppose he was busy earning a living, you know, as an accountant. Because where there was Oscar and Gail and Ken and Grace. There was 4 children. You know, and probably, I suppose in those days you did have to have quite a good job in order to bring money in. Of course, farther in those days than it does now, that's for one thing sure. But he was totally different from Uncle Walter, completely. You couldn't believe that they were brothers. And Dad was very fond of them. He really got an awful lot of them. And Aunt Belle was a very sweet lady, too. Do you remember her at all?
Well, I remember the day she died.
Yeah.
But tell us about her.
She was the friendliest person. I remember the people didn't, well, I suppose they were more standoffish with strangers or people maybe than they were later. But she would talk to anybody, it didn't matter who they were, and she'd chat to them away. And she was very pretty. And she was a pretty lady even when she was older. Maybe you remember that. And the friendliest person. And I thought she was just lovely. When I would go out, you know, she would be so gracious and kind to a young girl. Because lots of times I think young girls can be pests. But I would go out and visit with Grace, you see, and I love Grace so much. Do you remember her? Yeah. Grace and Aunt Louise and Janie all looked the same. And I often thought, you know, isn't it strange how that, what heredity does to us. And I think that Aunt Belle was out skating right till the time she died. In fact, she could have been out skating the day she died. I don't just quite remember. But I don't think Uncle Beagle was a very well man. I don't think he was very strong. I don't know whether he had the same heart trouble, but so many of the Pedersens did. See, my grandfather Pedersen's only sister, the only relative he had left in Denmark, died of heart trouble when she was 19 years old. And I believe her name was Astrid, too. That's why Astrid's name. And, but Uncle Walter went to Copenhagen in later years, and he tried to find some trace of, that family, but he never was able to. It just seemed not to be available. Whether, as I'm thinking, that there were no relatives left when they left Denmark. That maybe was one reason that they didn't mind leaving. But
did you ever go out to the house in Brookville?
Oh, yes.
And
many times.
What was it like? What was your memory of the house and the way it was?
Well, to tell you the truth, one thing I remember, you know what young people are like, I remember that it wasn't as warm as this house. It was heated with steam and it was just lovely. But it was very roomy inside, and Aunt Belle was, as I said, a very gracious lady, and it was a very well-built house, and I think they were very comfortable there. Evidently, they lived well, and I know that the Grace played tennis all the time and was brought up as a young lady, and but I don't remember very much a garden around it. Although it seemed to me that there was quite a place that ran down from the house to the road. It's set back from the road quite a bit. I don't know whether it's still in existence. Is it really? For goodness sake. That must be quite an age now.
There's another little house built in front of it, but it's still up there on that hill.
I remember that kind of an open place. Yeah. And I suppose there must have been flowers there.
So what's your memory of Ken?
Oh, Ken. Ken was a marvelous person. And, Ken, and as we always called him Gale, because his name was I always thought an awkward name, Gale, in the Danish name for George. So we called him Gale. The two of them were just like brothers to me. And I was around with them a lot when I was growing up. I don't know how it happened. And I can remember Ken going ski-oaring, you know what that is, behind a horse on skis, out on Lake, Lily Lake in the wintertime. And I rode the horse, Larry, because it wouldn't have been safe for Ken to just take him with, they just had reins, you see, and that's what pulled them along on the skis. But I rode him, but Ken had the reins just the same and was towed along. And Larry would just gallop around that place just like something crazy. And Ken was a marvelous skier. So I suppose we must have been together a lot in that time. And that would have been, I suppose I might have been in my early 20s. And I suppose Ken must have been about the same age, probably. And I brought out a snapshot of the two of them on one of my father's weekends. And this is your father here, and there is Gail in there, and that's Jerry Rolston, who's married to my cousin. That's cousin there. There's Dad in there in the middle of all the people. Dad loved the whole crowd out like that, and a picnic and out in the boat, you know. The only thing he didn't like about the Rossley crowd when they came out in the boat was because they played cards all afternoon instead of enjoying the yachting. You see, Ken and Gail, Dad, well, he was more like a father to those boys, really, than an uncle. And he thought the world of them. And also of Minty. Minty could do no wrong. she was perfect.
Well, tell us about when you first met her. When would you have first met Minty Golding?
Met who?
Minty Golding.
Minty? You want me to tell you when I first remember Minty? We were out at the cottage, of course, every summer. Mother and grandmother, when she was living, and me. And we'd stay out there all summer until the day before school opened. And Minty and her parents and the boys had a cottage. I don't know whether I believe they had the Porter cottage.
And that's right here on the Kennebecases at Sandy Point?
Right at the end of Sandy Point, around on the beach road. And it was quite a little distance around from our cottage. And lo and behold, we would see this little girl, the cutest little thing about so high, and she would come toddling down. There was kind of a hill in front of our place and then a level. She would come trotting down there all by herself and away around, and Mother would get worried about her, you know, going so small. And in a few minutes you would see a couple of the boys, I suppose it was Jack and probably Eric would be the next older, wouldn't he? And they would come tearing down the road looking for Minty. And that's my first memory of her. And I don't remember after that how I came to meet Minty. She just seemed to always be part of my life, and she was like a sister to me. She was a wonderful person. And I remember when she was married, and John Allison had horses, and he was a great friend of mine. And he was also a great friend of Ken's, you see, because Ken was always around too. So we cooked it up, and they had this big open carriage. Did they ever tell you about it? Yeah, with the big white horse. And they came and collected them, and then they drove off around King Square, I remember. And Ken and Minty were looking so happy to go in it. And we had a great time that day of the wedding.
So you were happy to add her to the Pedersen family?
Oh, happy, I guess we were. She just fitted right in. And as I say, Dad just adored her. I had a snapshot of her. I think I gave it to one of the family. I don't know who. Mindy at the wheel of the Osprey, and she was just very young then, you know. I think she must have been just probably married a very short time. I don't think there were any children around at that time. And Dad just loved to have her around. My mother very rarely went on the boat, so I don't think she would have come in contact very much with Mindy. But Mindy was a great favorite with everybody in the family.
And certainly after she was married, you saw her quite a bit through the years, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I remember going up to Lakeside when they were living there. I remember when they were over in the, I guess it's part of the rifle range, way down the end where those nice apartments are. And I remember when she was working for Dr. Rogers, too. I think she was still working for Dr. Rogers when she was killed. And I think my cousin Helen was very attached to her, too. And we were always doing things together, you know, like going on picnics or fishing or out on the boat. Dad loved to have the young people around, and they were all Uncle Chris to him from the time any of them came aboard, whether he was their uncle or not. But Mindy, sweet person. And I remember her mother and father very well, too. I think you're very clever, like Walter Golding was, with writing, and he had a good brain, a dandy brain.
Tell us what you remember of him, of Walter Golding.
He used to tease me. I'll tell you, he was more a friend of Uncle Walter. I don't think he ever had any inkling that Uncle Walter was rum running. I'm positive of it. I know your father would never like that very much. But he was friendly with Walter. And I think my dad probably resented that maybe a little bit. But I remember Mr. Golding, and he was a very kind man. No, and they were, I would have said they were very good people. They had good lives, and they did the best they could with their lives, which is a good thing to be able to remember. And they were interesting people. There was nothing, as I said, dull about them, that's for sure.